Hi, everybody, and welcome back to True Confessions of a PK. I'm Karina.
I'm Karla.
And I wanted to, we're going to start with a question. So, Karla, as a woman in church, who had roles of like a leader, right? Because you were a worship leader, you were a youth leader. How did other people see you? Like, was it difficult for you because some people might not have seen you as a leader because you were a woman? I mean, obviously your age had part of your experience in how people would view you because you were really young compared to other people. But how do you feel people viewed you?
Honestly, I had two different experiences. There's individuals that would see me and they wouldn't it wasn't necessarily, the way they would see me wasn't necessarily based on my gender or on my age. It was more based on, oh, this is an instrument from God. God is using this person. And then there were individuals that I had experiences with who, because I was a girl, they didn't really, they wouldn't accept words that God would tell me to tell them, or prayers, or even prophecies, or they wouldn't accept even advice from me, because especially if they were male. It's easier for a female to be able to converse with a female from church. But when it's a female conversing with a male, there's a bunch of stereotypes, there's the idea that a woman shouldn't be superior to a man. And I'm not saying that we are or anything like that. We're not talking about that. But I feel like God can use a woman. As much as God can use a man, God can use a woman. Mm-hmm. But people wouldn't, they don't necessarily see things like that, or since one time I remember I had received a word for a guy from a youth group, and I asked someone, oh, can I have their phone number? Cause they left. It was a retreat. So they left, and I felt I really need this word. It was still bugging me that I didn't give that word. So I just said can I have this person's phone number so I can give them the word? And it became a huge thing because they're like, how dare you ask for a guy's number? When that wasn't necessarily what was happening. I didn't want to have, I didn't even want anything to do with the kid, or with the guy, because we were young.
They just saw it that way.
Yeah. And they thought because we were around the same age and because I was a girl and he was a guy, what I was trying to do was use, I guess you can say, God as a way to get his number,
as an excuse,
when that wasn't the case. And so in the end, I told that person, okay, don't give me his number. If it's from God, that person's going to receive that word later on too. And I remember later on, they realized, because that person was at the church service on Sunday, and he received the exact same word from someone else, the exact same word that I had received for him. Mm-hmm. And later on, the leader was like, oh, I'm sorry, I mistaked this.
I misread it,
yeah. And those are little issues that, because of your gender, mm-hmm. It becomes an issue when it shouldn't be an issue. You know what I mean? If God gives me a word for a guy, it's coming from God, And I understand where they're coming from, because people can use it. They can use their gender as a way to and I mean, use God as a way to get to know someone romantically. I don't know. But it shouldn't be that way. And because of those people that do twist things around, they're people have this mentality, you know what I mean? So that's what I have experienced basically when it comes to that, like little things like that I experienced because I was a female leader.
Okay.
But yeah.
So, going to the Bible, right? Mm-hmm. And looking at the story of Deborah, because that's the story that we're going to talk about. Looking at the story of Deborah, would you say that there's a moment that maybe you could relate or no?
Yeah. So when we were planning like this discussion and then we were looking at the story of Deborah, you can find the story of Deborah in Judges, the book of Judges. And I think it's like there's 2 chapters that discuss her, but we're going to mainly focus on chapter 4. And essentially this is the story. Deborah is living during a time where the people of Israel have failed God again. This group of individuals have been failing God, and every time they fail God, they cry out to God, and God comes and rescue them, and then they fail him again. And, it's just like a cycle of wrongdoings. But the people of Israel fail God again, and this new king comes in control of them, right, of the people of Israel. And he's not like the best king. And so the people of Israel cry out to God again, and they're like, help us, we need help. And Deborah is living during this time. And the Bible says how she's like, you could find her under a palm tree. Like, the woman was just chilling there. And she was basically just like this instrument of God at this time, where people would come to her for advice and for, they would use her as a judge. Like, she was like a judge during that time. Like, people would come with her with situations and she would help resolve it. But she was an instrument of God. Like, it was God through her, Mm-hmm. And so at this time, God speaks to Deborah and tells her to call upon this man named Barak. And so she does, and he basically tells her to tell him to go up to this mountain with this amount of people, like a group of men, and that was going to draw out this general from the army. And he's Sisera, yeah, and he's basically like the top general, of the king. He's like in charge of them. And so she was like, yeah, do that, and like this is gonna draw out the general, and like you're gonna get victory, And so Barak is like, well, I'll only do that if you come with us. Like, that's how important Deborah was to the people. Like, they understood that she had this intimate relationship with God. So he was like, well, I'll only do that if you come with us. So then Deborah tells him, okay, but if I go with you, you need to understand that the victory isn't going to be done through your hands. It's going to be done through a woman's hand. And he's like, okay, like, whatever. Like, he's like, it didn't really bother him. He was just like, as long as you come with us, right? And so she ends up going with him. So basically what happens is that she tells Barak, okay, this is the day. So Barak goes with the men to the mount, and it does draw out the general, right, with his whole army. Well, obviously, like, this is like up against God's people. You know what I mean? And it's a prophecy by God. And so Sisera, the general, ends up getting scared, like spooked, right? And he's like, yeah, like, this isn't going so good. So he ends up abandoning his army. Running away. He runs off, into the desert. Just kidding. I don't know if it was the desert, but he runs off. And during this time, there's this other woman, and she had set up a tent, right? And so the man, like the general, runs into her, and he tells her like basically provide me shelter. And she's like, yeah, like I'll give you shelter. You can stay in my tent. And so he's like, okay, well, just stand guard in the front of the tent. Why? Like, because he was like obviously tired from running off and abandoning his whole army. And so he's like, just stand in the front of the tent and let me know, like, basically be the, what's it called? The stakeout. Yeah. And let me know in case of anything, like if you see anybody coming up, right? And so he ends up falling asleep, and this lady, her name is Jael. Mm-hmm. She goes and she gets this
a hammer and a nail.
It wasn't like, let's say like a giant hammer and nail, and it's like a pike. Mm-hmm. And she basically like hammers the pike into the temple of his head, like all the way through until it touched like
the
it
ground.
Came out. Yeah. And he died. And so when Barak comes, like she runs into Barak and she tells him like, you're going to find Sisera in the tent dead.
That's the victory.
That's the victory. Yeah. And reading this story, it's interesting because you see how in the beginning it's Deborah, the one that's being used by God. Mm-hmm. And it could have easily been different. Like God could have easily spoken to Barak directly. Like, hey, Barak, do this and this and that. But I feel like God knows everybody, right? Mm-hmm. And so he knew Barak. And he knew that Barak wasn't going to follow the instructions unless Deborah was there, because he wanted to make sure like this is coming from God, you know? And so like God could have easily spoken directly to Barak. Things could have gone different, you know? But God spoke to Deborah to give that prophecy to Barak. And God could have easily given the victory to Barak. Like he could have easily said, Barak, this is your guy, here he is, kill him, you know? Instead, this woman comes out of nowhere, and she's the one that ends up killing him and bringing victory. You know, like, there's these two women who God is using to help the people of Israel. Mm-hmm. And it's during this time where the relationship of the people of Israel and God isn't the strongest. You know, they have been failing him nonstop. And they just have like a back and forth relationship with God, because one day they're good with him. The next they're over there selling their lives in order to receive something they want. You know what I mean? And so it's like this on and off again relationship. And God takes notice of all that, you know? And today, in today's society, we are seeing a lot more incorporation of women in churches, you know, but I feel like it's important to understand that a woman has a place in church. A woman has a place in God. You know, God can easily use a woman, mm-hmm. whether it be in prophecy and healing or whatever it may be, even giving advice. You know, women are instruments of God. Mm-hmm. You know, and if God wants to use a woman instead of the man, like, who are you to stop God, or who are you to question God, you know? And like I said, like in my case, you know, I knew that the word that I received was coming from God, you know? I knew what my intentions were. I knew that I wasn't just talking just to talk or doing things just to doing. Mm-hmm. But even though there was lack of faith, I guess, or whatever you may call it, or even like questioning mm-hmm. the situation, I didn't take offense to it, because I was like, well, whether I give the word or not, like God knows what the situation I'm in, he's going to still give that word to that person, you know? And just seeing that happen was just confirmation that this was from God. Yeah. You know, and I think that's what people just need to be more attentive to. Like we've spoken about having discernment, you know, and knowing when things are coming from God and when they're not. And I think that's important when it comes to genders too. Like knowing when things are coming through the person from God, you know. That's essentially what we wanted to talk about. We wanted to discuss the role that women have in churches, or like in the house of God, you know? Because like what you said, like, I mean, there's always this idea that a woman, like, she can participate in like choir, you know?
Okay.
Or she can participate in the dance team, or like in Sunday school, right? Mm-hmm. But when it comes to like being praying, like in the front, and like in the pulpit, or preaching for a Sunday service, like that's where a lot of people draw the line.
And the thing is, when you look at the story of Deborah, you see two different women. You see a woman that God is constantly using and is known for being used by God, by the people. Like, they know that God's been using her. And then you have a woman who just shows up out of nowhere, you know? You have these two different women. You have the woman, Deborah, who people see constantly being used by God, and they know is being used by God. And then you have Jael, who the people don't necessarily see being used by God as frequent, or maybe they don't see her being used by God, but is still an instrument of the Lord, right? And in church, obviously you have those two different women. You have, for example, you were a leader of the worship team, you were a leader of youth, right? You're constantly being used as an instrument of God. And then there's, well, for example, me. I'm not saying that we are them, but I'm saying like we can put ourselves kind of in those categories where I wasn't a leader in things, but I was also being used by God, you know? And it's just how God's will is being fulfilled through different types of people, through different genders, and through different ages or generations. That's just the focus of the Lord's will, you know? Mm-hmm. It's not necessarily for one person, one age, one gender. It's for everybody, and all victory and glory to Him, you know?
Yeah.
Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah. So essentially that was the topic for today. Like, that's what we wanted to discuss, and we hope that it brought some insight, I don't know, to how you see things. And yeah, like if you're a girl that is afraid to be used at church, or afraid that because based on your gender, you're going to be like discriminated against, like just know, like I would just suggest like read the Bible and then understand like God doesn't discriminate against you based on your gender, like female or male. You know what I mean? Like He uses, you can see different characters in the Bible that have been used. Like, for example, we haven't mentioned them, but like Esther, Ruth, like these are females that
Noemi.
Noemi, yeah. These are females that are used in the Bible. Deborah. And then you have males that are used in the Bible too, and throughout history. So like, yeah, that was our point for today.
Yeah.
But we hope that you enjoyed this episode. And like we said, like follow, subscribe,
Like.
yeah. And let us know if you guys need any prayers in specific, or if you guys have any topics that you want us to discuss. Karina, give the socials.
At True Confessions PK. Hold on. true.confessionspk@gmail.com is our Gmail. And then Instagram, True Confessions PK. YouTube as well.
Okay, guys. Thank you.
Bye.